welcome back to the PMR Podcast. Before we get into this week's episode, I wanted to share with you our first partnership with Clean Cause. Clean Cause is a pretty awesome company. They sell yerba mate drinks. The founder is in recovery, and they put 50% of their net profits back into those struggling with addiction and alcoholism. Absolutely love their company, absolutely love their message, and very thankful for them to partner with us. If you're interested in getting some, you go to their website, cleancause.com. All right. When you're checking out, you're going to enter in Mitch20 into the discount code area, and that's going to get you 20% off on these fire drinks. Right now, I got that cherry lime. All right. Enjoy this week.
Welcome back to the PMR Podcast. This is episode 38. Really excited for this one. Very, very special guest today. My name's Andrew. I'm an alcoholic and an addict.
Welcome back. My name is Mitch. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. And yes, extremely special guest. We have Zoe on today. She is a friend of Andrew and I's. I've known her for 6 or 7 years, maybe something like that. Upon my re-entry into Denison, and she's someone that has supported me. I know I'll speak from my experience. She supported me a lot early on in my recovery, and a good friend of mine. We became closer friends going into my junior and senior year, and honestly, I don't know how many times I've said thank you for that, but you have always been like a level-headed person in my life that supported me and checked in on me. And that's, I've talked about this on the podcast before, but people like you especially really helped me get through some of the times when I wouldn't go to meetings and wouldn't lean on other people in AA and stuff. So a big thank you, and I really do appreciate you, and I'm happy that I have you in my life. And to that extent, or to another extent, she is the reason why this podcast was formed. For anyone that's wondering, Andrew and I did not bump into each other at Trader Joe's. Zoe connected us in August of last year. She's like, hey, I think you guys would be friends. Sent over the phone number, and Andrew and I hopped on a call, and literally we started the podcast a couple of weeks later. So all the credit to her for that. She is a very special person. She's just got accepted into grad school and will be moving to New York, which is very exciting. So thank you, Zoe, so much for all of that, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. What a sweet introduction. I'm happy to be here. It's so funny, you guys talk a lot on here of like, we've never met in person, or this is like my virtual best friend, or, whatever your language is. And I've known you both for a long time and known you in person for a long time. And I'm glad that this connection kind of happened. I think Andrew reached out towards the beginning of his journey, and I'm always here to be supportive, but I also know that you can only give so much when you don't know or understand that journey. So while I could be supportive, I was like, two guys that, played sports, went to Denison, similar demeanor. Not only did I think you guys have this relationship in your journey, but y'all also would just get along, I think, in general. So I'm glad that it's worked out and it's become this podcast, and TikTok and Instagram, go follow.
Thank you.
And all the things. It's great.
Yeah, before we really hop in, the way that we came together, I know, Zoe, it was weird. When I was, again, you said, I reached out to you in the beginning of my journey, and I did. And I don't really know, what kind of came over me in terms of, and Mitch, I don't know if this happened to you too, but I was surprised somewhat by some of the people that I did reach out to and some of the people I didn't reach out to, in the beginning, when I was kind of in my most vulnerable state. And for some reason, and Mitch, you talked about it a little bit too, of Zoe being just a person that you could lean on, even though she's not in the program or whatever. she was always a support. For some reason, I just felt like the same energy. I was like, I know I can lean on her, and kind of trust her with this. And we were pretty close in college, and then, you know, when I reached out to you and the support I got, it was very, very important for me. So I have a lot of gratitude for you, and then bringing us together. Like, the way you reached out to me, you were like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't do this sooner. Like, there's this kid, you got to meet him. And I remember, like, that day I called you, Mitch, like that day I called you. And I was on vacation, and I remember exactly where I was. I made the call, and here we are on the podcast, you know, over 6 months later. What is it? 8 months? And it's crazy, and it's all because of you, Zoe. So thank you. I think Mitch has a question for you.
Oh yeah. So we haven't done this in a while with our
No.
guests. But we did for a little bit like to ask what your when the word addict or alcoholic is presented, what does that look like? What does that feel like for you when you hear like, oh, that person is an addict? What does that look like?
It's definitely been a journey. I have both my parents are psychologists. So I have a background in an introduction into mental health that probably is a little different than most people's. My dad works in addiction therapy, more particularly around behavioral addiction, less than chemicals. But so addiction to me has always kind of been like either through your family or this is like when I was understanding it in middle school, or probably around that time, was like someone that really needed help, and for whatever reason they kept cycling into the same bad habits over and over again, and that stemmed from like a psychological state. And I think I slowly started learning that could be because of, like, you know, your genetics. It could be from trauma. It could be coping skills. I think I probably also, for a long time, thought of it as pretty scary. I have always been really kind of intrigued by those documentaries of people who, you know, are on the streets, who have homelessness, and kind of like just watching these worlds, like worst case scenarios, unable to help themselves. I was addicted to, like, for lack of a better word, to like hoarding TV shows. And so I think I probably mostly just felt bad for these kinds of people who are addicts. And then I would say when my cousin OD'd about 8 years ago, I was a freshman. I guess it was a little longer than that. I was a freshman in high school, and I was about to go to a swim meet, and my dad kind of brought me in to his office. We were supposed to leave and go to Nashville for this meet, and he kind of brought me in and was like, two of your cousins have OD'd, and one has made it and one hasn't. And I think that was kind of a bigger click of heartbreak. And these are good people. Like, these are my family members. This is no longer like homeless people on the street or documentaries or movies. Like, this is two family members, like close people of my heart, who are amazing, funny, kind, thoughtful people that got into a habit at a really young age and ended up kind of ripping the family apart for a long time. So yeah, that's kind of when it became a little bit more personal and probably a bit more human of a story.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we've shared before that when it comes to these sort of things, I feel like it's a similar story of if you haven't had an experience yourself, or if it hasn't affected your friends or family, that it's very much. I mean, I remember when I first heard of an AA meeting, I was like, it's all homeless people and their lives are falling apart. And then once I started getting into the program, it's literally every single kind of person that there is. And That sounds really hard though. I actually never knew that about you. But yeah, the that makes sense how that would change the perspective, definitely. Um,
I like what you said too. Like, I mean, first of all, I know it was a long time ago. I'm sorry. OD is never easy to deal with. I think Mitch and I have now seen it play out several occasions as well. And it's a lot of questions like why did they feel the need, and anger, and I don't know, a lot of like I put my palms up, like what am I supposed to feel? So that's a lot in and of itself. But kind of back to what you were first talking about, I think it's really interesting, growing up with two psychologists parents. I think it'd be interesting to have a conversation with your dad, first of all, about
Yeah,
his
definitely.
line of work. But also, like, I have a similar experience growing up, with my conception of addiction. Early on, before I got into substances, before I kind of saw it in media and in TV shows and everything else. Like, I was maybe the kid that you that was seeing people like your dad. I had a lot of I was diagnosed very early with like pretty intense OCD. Um, I think the category that I could most identify that you mentioned was coping skills, right? Like, I felt like my world was out of control all the time. So
Hmm.
I spent a lot of obsessive time on little things that I could control, like locking doors, washing hands, stealing things, telling little lies. Um, and I think that was my first like foray into addiction, right? Um, and I think while they're separate, like, and I maybe you could speak on this, I think the two are really linked. For at least they were for me. Because when it would, when it kind of leveled up, and I was seeing psychologists, and I had psychiatrists now at this point, and I had prescriptions and everything else, and tried to get external help. Um, and it wasn't working, right? And I'm getting older, and these like worldly pressures are building up. Um, that's when substance came in, and now we have like the chemical addiction. But it was for the same reason, like because I felt my world was out of control, and I needed to have control over something. And that little feeling of being high gave me a feeling of control and release. But I don't know, like, do you think the two are linked? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think like, I mean, again, I'm not an expert in any of this. So this is just conversations ad nauseum with my parents. But coping skills, it's funny because it's like they're both can be these really, I mean, you need coping skills. People who don't have coping skills, you see, are extremely emotional and they have trouble keeping jobs and friends. And so it's really, but then you also have this other side where those coping skills end up being harmful or maybe even more harmful than what you're trying to control because it is a control thing. Like coping skills is breath work, but it could also be the locking the doors to the point where you're now late for work because you've got to do A, B, C. And so when it starts to affect your life, instead of help live a full life, it becomes a problem. So, I mean, I see it all the time. I mean, we're talking about addiction, but like friends who have depression, anxiety, what coping skills are they leaning on? Are those helpful or are they harmful? Where are they coming from?
And how did growing up with two parents in that field, how'd that go? Because my like cynical brain is like they tested stuff on you.
They did. I did so many tests when I was younger. Side note, I was tested for dyslexia when I was 6, and I did so many tests that I didn't know what was going on. And I found out I actually did, in fact, have dyslexia when I was a junior in college when I asked. And honestly, like, talk about coping skills. My dad was like, is a pretty firm believer in like, you don't have a thing. You have areas that you need work in. So when you name something, sometimes like something for like, I have ADHD, like that's pretty common right now. That gives them something to sit in and say, like, I'm not crazy. Like I have a way that I think and need to do things, and it works for them. The downside is saying like, I have this thing, and then therefore I don't have to do anything. Like I can't read. Oh, I have dyslexia, so I'm just not a reader. So that's kind of where he was at. So he put me in tutoring. He got me, like, he pushed books on me all the time. Like looking back, I think he was developing so many of those skills, those coping skills or skills to get around my reading curve, without saying you have dyslexia. Because then I just could start using it as a crutch. So I guess that's probably something that someone who's not in psychology as a parent probably wouldn't do to their kids, but it worked out okay for me.
Yeah. Fun fact about I am also dyslexic, and the only reason I moved to Maryland was my mom moved me there to go to like a remediatory specialty school for dyslexia, and that's why I grew up in Maryland. But I remember like faking. I have like one crux moment where I remember faking reading Captain Underpants in class. I couldn't read any of it, and that's when I got called out. They're like, could you read that at all? And I was like, yeah, I'm good, and just couldn't understand it at all. But I don't know, I was gonna ask. I know you sent me something a while ago, and it's something that I'm super interested in, and it's kind of like the crossover of like a higher power, and some of the jargon is the same throughout like religions and in AA. And I know some people from an outside perspective see AA as potentially Christian or having a God or Jesus implement. And from my perspective, that's really been, it may have began with like that, but it is moved more towards a higher power of your understanding. But if people don't know, you are the creative director of, I don't want to get it wrong, 1750 Idlewild, which is your church.
Yeah, it's a Presbyterian church here in the center of Midtown Memphis.
That's awesome. And I wanted to ask, like, how you what's your perspective on the crossover of like a higher power? Like, what's the importance of believing in a higher power for you in your own way, and then maybe why you think it's important in recovery?
Yeah, I think recently you guys, you guys have touched on this higher power subject a couple times and mentioned how sometimes you just got to give it up, like give up this heaviness, give up the decision, give up the situation that you're in, and like give it up. And for me, I'll give it up to God. And I think that is something that we can all like live into. And I started working here in 2020 after school, was not looking to work in a church. I went to Catholic school, but honestly, that made me very I wanted to get away from religion by all means after Catholic school. But I knew this place to be a pretty community-centered place that involved all of Memphis, people who need resources, were the home for a lot of unhoused guests is what we call them, who live at our church in the evenings that we try and help. And so when I was thinking of eventually going to museum work, that's how I want museums to be, which is what I'm going to school for. So I saw that connection. So I started working here, and it's bringing in faith into the everyday, like bringing in breath, bringing in prayer, and recentering yourself of like where your goals are. Something that I want to take wherever I go. So beginning a meeting with honestly breath work, like you guys have talked about a good bit. Beginning the meeting saying, we're here to do the work of the Lord, and recentering has been really like life-giving. And I see a little bit of that within AA or within therapy, these sorts of resets, to take a pause and to recenter yourself of like what really matters and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And if you do that regularly, if that becomes a practice, then when you have these really difficult moments or challenges, you can like so easily revert back to that goal. So I'm still on my faith journey, but it's grown so much since for these 2.5 years that I've been working here. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely.
Because I've like sent you a couple like prayers and meditations.
Which was that was super dope. That one, it was literally when I had come out of a meeting that week where they were talking about being open to listening to other ways of prayer and meditation. And and finding, because some guy had shared that
to center down.
Huh?
I think it was how good is it to center down to find peace?
Yes. Yeah. And like the crossover and the verbiage, like some things changed here and there, but a lot of crossover into, a lot of the idea of, like you were saying, like believing in something greater than yourself, kind of erasing our self-will and to be of service. And those things, it doesn't need to have any certain kind of particular religious context or anything really. It's just like a principle with, I feel like not a lot of religion, but there's a component of religion that's moral building. And those are just good things to have, I think.
When you start to notice those types of things, when like prayer comes into your life or breath work or centering or whatever you want to call it, I've noticed I start noticing more about like friends and family and people around me, and like picking up on maybe when they need prayer. I've noticed that in the past year. Like I met someone, like a mutual friend, and she was very briefly spoke about how her kid was going to go to this doctor's appointment, and she was a little nervous about it. And I had her Instagram, I followed her, and I just sent her a message like 3 or 4 days later after we got back saying like, hope it goes well. That's definitely from practice of prayer, just like noticing those things, being able to pick up on them, and then like be able to check in on people.
Kind of like getting outside of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've noticed too. A lot of it is like, until I started doing the prayer and meditation and centering and stuff like that, and it still can get to this point where it's just like my life, my problems. I'm talking to you because I need this from you, not much interest in others and stuff like that. And for me, that was not the best way to go about living. I think that it definitely is. It feels good to pick up the phone and call someone and see how they're doing. Like Andrew and I were just talking about that like last week or something, like just calling, for us specifically, calling a newcomer and seeing how they're doing. If I'm having a bad day and we just talk about what's going on with them, that's really worked for me. That's like, as soon as I hang up the phone, even if we don't talk about what's going on with me, I feel more centered or balanced on what's going on. So
I think that's huge. And honestly, that was something I was curious to hear you guys talk about. Was, I think, I'm not I'm not sober. And I have a lot of friends who are, and that's a part of their life. And I think there's like anxiety with people who are not on this journey that you guys are on of like, how can I be supportive? Like, I mean, I think a huge thing with you, Mitch, was in college, like, do we invite him to parties? Or should we just hang out? Or, should we, oh, I got you like a non-alcoholic drink and like, or is that making a big deal of it? I think people have a lot of anxiety about that. And so I wanted to hear you guys talk about what that looks like for you and what maybe it looks like in those sorts of settings. And I know it's going to be different for everyone, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, and Mitch, I do want to hear about like what it was like for you in school, because you had a different experience than me, being sober in college, like while playing a sport and going to parties and actively being like a part of social life, which I was not, as Zoe well knows and Mitch knows. Mitch doesn't know because he didn't know me, but I lived in a cave. Like I didn't leave my dwelling for like 4 years. So, but it looks like for me now, like I think people are scared. Like I know my friends, and I have friends like you, Zoe, and others who are a little closer to me, like who I see more often, who they wonder, like, do we invite you places? Like, do we invite you to the bar? Like when we're gonna go watch a game, should we take you to a Red Sox game, even though we're gonna be drinking beers? And I think, Mitch, this kind of goes back to something we talked about last week, where it's like, I can't expect other people, like my friends, to make like accommodations for me unless I'm communicative, like unless I present my boundaries and what I'm comfortable with and what I'm not comfortable with. And I can only do that. Like I can only have that conversation if I'm in a healthy place myself. Like if I'm comfortable with who I am, comfortable in my sobriety, like not embarrassed about the fact that I don't drink or do drugs anymore. And that's taken me some time, right? Like I for a very long time early on here, like I was very uncomfortable going to a bar because I was self-conscious about being like the guy with the glass of water, like in drinking like a soda water with a lime in it. Like I didn't I was like, that's not who I want to be. And that the other like point of it is like I didn't want to hold my friends back. Like I don't want to hold you back from having a good time. But I think the thing that we fail to realize, and Mitch, again, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is like our true friends, like people who really care about us, like you with Mitch in college and making like having those concerns for him, like our true friends aren't worried about like us holding them back from getting fucked up. Like they want to spend time with us. Like and Mitch and I joked about this last week. Like our friends typically don't use like we do. Like, so they're not going to be like doing the same things that we were doing in active use around us because they don't do that. Like that's kind of the disconnect. So in a very roundabout way, what I'm saying is that the only way for like the discomfort to kind of be dealt with is if I'm okay with myself and I'm okay having a conversation and just being honest, like this is what I need, and if I'm also okay with like the other person being honest, hey, I'm gonna have a couple beers, hey, I'm gonna do this, hey, I'm gonna do that, like and for there to be like no, like I told my friends pretty early on, hey, don't take it personally if I don't show up, like because I'm fucked up, like I am like my addiction, the way that things manifest for me, like I might show up for 5 minutes and leave because something triggers me. And it's not because you screwed me over. It's because I have something going on with me. Like, I don't know, Mitch, what do you think?
I think a couple things. Do you remember that group chat, Zoe? It was like on a group meet, and I got added into it when I officially was like coming back to the class. And do you remember
Yes.
what happened? There was like that. I think I can't remember exactly, but I think it ended up being Bebe said something about it was like a joke about drinking or like getting blacked out or something. And at that time, I was like, I think I said, I don't remember exactly what I said. I said like that's like please don't say that around me or something like that. And I hadn't even made it back to campus. And I grew in my recovery too to be like, you don't want to be it's a hard blend because you don't want to be like the sober guy and you have to walk on eggshells around him. Like if you say the word alcohol, he's like, hey, don't say that. And I think that was like one of the only times where I ever said something like that. And then going forward, it was more like trying to find that balance that you were saying. Like it was uncomfortable for you guys and it was uncomfortable for me. I think, and I tried to, because I was like the party guy when I was there before. And I was like, I can still be the party guy. And I couldn't, at least initially. I know that first year I did a lot of like isolating in that sober living dorm. And like my roommate was Kamani. So like he was going out and stuff. And I wanted to be a part of the group. I mean, that's like a big thing that we talk about, how we feel other. And so when I got sober, I was like, fuck, I still feel other. And I wanted to be back a part of the group. And so I think I bent my boundaries like Andrew and I were talking about last week. I think I bent them to appease, even though I think you guys would have been cool even if I just straight up said no. But and I know you would have been. And it was weird. I mean, it was like a weird thing to balance because I think there's times where I would just like leave the parties, like kind of like Irish goodbye. And I even felt bad doing that. Like, there's a part of me that's like want to explain like, hey, fun party and I'm having fun, but I've been staring at your cup for 15 minutes. I gotta go. And
I think
yeah, I mean,
Denison
I
kind of,
think it was just it was a hard thing to navigate, and I think some years I did better than others. I think my first year back, I did a good job of setting up the boundary of just staying in my room for at least that first semester, and then my junior year, I think I didn't do so good, and then the senior year was weird too because we had parties in our room, and like I mean, we had a lot of fun and stuff like that, but it was always it was always a balancing act.
So what were you gonna say?
yeah, I mean, as you speak about that, I'm thinking of like our culture at Denison in particular, campus where you're with everyone and everyone lives on campus. And like, I think of the fun times, particularly when you were there, were like when we would go out to eat and maybe there were drinks involved. And like, I think you'd used to like buy drinks for Kamani or something, or just order them. And the first time I was like, what is going on? And then I realized that you're just getting a drink for Kamani. But I feel like that was like good energy. And we could actually all hang out and chat. And honestly, those are the best scenarios for myself. But like Denison was like such a party, like dark room. You couldn't speak to anyone. Sweaty. I mean, as I think about it, it was kind of like the worst kind of scenario for people who are trying to navigate that, because it wasn't like let's all even go to the bars and be able to talk to people or meet new people. It was just dark rooms, like strobe lights. And you couldn't talk to anyone. You couldn't meet anyone really. The music was, unless Steve-O was doing it, wasn't good. I do feel like thinking about people starting sobriety in college, putting yourself, like, there are probably some scenarios that are better than others.
Yeah.
I think making us live on campus, like I talk about this with you, Mitch, sometimes. It's like, to me, it's a miracle that you stayed sober the whole time. Like, because they kept us on campus. I think it would be different if, like, you could have a place not on that campus and just to retreat to and to sleep at night and to have as your own space. And um Zoe, I was curious too for you, like, on your side of it, right? And you talk a little bit about it, but I want to know, like, working with Mitch and with other friends that you have, like, now in sobriety, like, what is being a supportive friend and knowing not only, like, your capabilities of being somebody to lean on, but also, maybe some of the limitations because, maybe you're not in the program, because this is a perspective that Mitch and I don't have. Um, I'd love to know, like, what does that look like? What did you learn? How is it with Mitch in college and versus how it is now? Um, and how it is to be a friend and a support to somebody who has this disease.
I'd say it's probably different for every friend that I have, for sure. I mean, I think being friends with you guys, with my cousin who is in sobriety, and you kind of learn the skills. And I definitely check in, but probably the same way that I would check in on someone who I know is just going through it with whatever it is. I wouldn't say it's necessarily different. And I have, like, a good friend who comes around, in part, like, more party kind of scenarios, but it's very laid back, and we know, oh, we'll just get non-alcoholic beer, which is what they like, and I know that they like that, and so it's not hard for me to make sure we pick that up so that they feel comfortable. But then I also, like, I was at a wedding recently, and met this guy one time. Just all I really knew is that he was sober, and he had been sober for, like, almost, or just got their 4 years right before the wedding, and that's really all I knew about them. And it was a friend of a friend, and I knew he had, like, a lot of anxiety, which brought him to use. And I saw him, and he looked so deeply uncomfortable, like, a lot of anxiety, just, like, he just looked very uncomfortable. And I do think it was probably he's pretty far into his sobriety, but I don't think he, like, goes out to weddings and big events like that. And so I kind of just, like, named the elephant in the room. I was like, oh, I just heard, 4 years. What's that like? That's exciting. What do you have going on in your life? Like, to just name it. And I don't know if that's the right move. And maybe you guys can talk about that. Like, but I could just tell it was on his mind, and felt like it was easier to know that he had people in the room that he didn't even know necessarily that were, like, supportive, and, like, it's not weird that you're drinking water, and, like, we're all here, and I'm glad you're here, and let's have dinner type of thing. So it's easier when you know the person, because you can build a relationship and know what they like, and know when to check in on them. But I feel like it's harder when you just meet someone and smaller scenarios. Yeah.
Yeah, I think often, like, for people outside of people that are supporting people in recovery, it's like sometimes it takes, like, the smallest thing, like something that you did with that guy probably saved his night. Not saying that he was thinking about drinking or anything, but he probably got a big sigh of relief off of that. I think that when I've been checked in on by you, or you've said something, like, encouraging, something like that, for me personally, I'll hold on to those things, and it gets me through whatever's going on. I think you said something at some point, I think within, like, the last year or 2 years, when I think I was in like, I was like going through the steps and struggling. You said something that just like fixed my, like helped me reset my whole day. And not to say that that's like only something that can happen between someone in recovery and someone out of recovery. It could definitely happen just between two friends. But do you remember that conversation? It was kind of like I think you came to the understanding that your words can truly change someone's perspective and truly change someone's day, however like minuscule or insignificant it may seem to you. It may carry a lot more weight than that to them.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. I mean, you don't know when you don't live someone's journey, you like don't know what is going to stick with them. Or even on the negative side, like, hey, let's get blacked out tonight. Like
Right.
that could be a funny thing in a group. Or I want to kill myself. Like,
Yeah.
I've definitely said that jokingly. And then after the fact, be like, those little things for some people, and you just don't know what scenarios they are, where that could affect someone. I feel like, and we're also in a world where it's like, oh, trigger warnings, like you have to be careful. But in some ways, if you care for people truly, it's important to have that, or at least have someone say, hey, didn't appreciate that, and to move on. But I do remember that conversation. I'm glad that it was on a positive side and not the other way around.
Yeah.
I will say, like, with that guy and at the wedding, and you just like said, fuck it, I'm gonna address the elephant in the room here. Like, I don't know if it's the same for you, Mitch, but I'd prefer that. Like, when I'm struggling or if I'm in a situation that's uncomfortable for me, and like it's kind of against like all of my addictive tendencies to like want to be open with somebody and be, share a emotional word with somebody, even especially somebody I don't really know that well, but I know that it's good for me. Like, I know that what you said to that person and whatever conversation you had with that person was, I could say with about 95% confidence that it was good for that person. Because for me, like, I'm in situations I'm uncomfortable with all the time. Like, there's always something new coming up that like I haven't faced sober or whatever. And when I have somebody, sober or not, like a friend or a sponsor or Mitch or whoever it is, that is just like, hey, yeah, I know this is kind of fucked up for you. Like, I'm here. Like, let's talk about it. That gives me a lot of comfort, because I don't I'm so used to burying things and just saying, yeah, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. That to acknowledge that elephant and to like actually dive into it and to get like kind of emotional with somebody is extremely healthy for me. So I think that was a good decision. And I think if I was that person, I'd probably be pretty grateful that somebody was like, hey, you're welcome here. We're glad you're here. You're not out of you're not out of place. You're not other. You're not separate from us. We're just, let's have dinner and talk. I think that was a good thing.
Do you feel like more having had like multiple experiences to this point with addiction and recovery and stuff like that, how does that feel? Like, do you ever have conversations with other friends and stuff about like, I guess like how to best go through that? I mean, like, because I feel like I guess what I was asking is like when we were at school, and then like you've known Andrew and then your cousin and stuff like that. Who have you asked your parents about how, like, because there's no class that's like, this is how you work with a person like that. Uh, like, how have you navigated that kind of by trial and error, or?
Yeah, I would say I find it much more difficult with people who I know have addiction and they're not seeking help, and I don't see them interested in. And because I know people around me, I know some of the psychological aspects of addiction. I know the signs, like, I've seen some of those questionnaires of like, do you think about it all the time? Like those kinds of questionnaires that you fill out online that are like, yeah, you might need to talk to somebody. I find it's really, really difficult to know people who are struggling with addiction and they don't see it that way. That is who I find it really hard to help. I feel like it's easy when it's someone who has gotten to the point where like, I have a problem. I need help. Like, if you're willing to reach out, great. Like everyone that I've met within recovery has been that type of person, and honestly is going to therapy and is pretty in touch with, or eventually will become in touch with what they need. Because that's the journey they're on. Whereas when it's not the journey, when you don't know your limits, when you have a pattern, when you're hurting the people around you, when it becomes a financial burden, when you no longer have friends, we're not inviting you anymore because you can't handle yourself. Like, those scenarios are very difficult for me to navigate. Because it's like, how do you tell someone that they need this for themselves? That's hard. I'm sure y'all know that.
Yeah, definitely. I was just going to ask, like, just a step further on that. Like, how does that look like from an outside perspective? Like a friend or a family member is struggling and it's obvious that they're struggling. Like, it's a very awkward position, I feel like. Like, what does that look like for you? Or has it looked like?
I think it starts with like not naming the word addiction, not necessarily naming, like going to those trigger words maybe, and more saying like, have you thought of just therapy? Like, have you thought of, hey, I see like your coping skills at parties, you seem to have a lot of anxiety. Is it hard for you to relax? Like, is it a lot for you to be around? How can I be helpful with that? Like, trying to name things. At least that's how I've done it. And I've not done it to where it works. So, but because I've dated someone for a long time who has struggled. And trying to name those things because it's just not even on their radar that they're saying to out loud. It's probably like deep down, y'all have talked about this, like deep in your core, like, but surface level, you would never say it out loud. So it's sad because eventually you start to just, you can't try anymore, and you start to push them away because they're hurting you. They're truly hurting your life. You're worried. They're difficult to be around. You feel responsible when you go out for their actions. You stop inviting them, and now they're secluded. Now they don't have people around them. That sucks too. You feel guilty about that. But like, at the end of the day, like, other than like capturing someone, driving to the car, like taking them to a center, which I know people have done, but I know that's not necessarily the best way to get results. So it's hard.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that perspective, because I think that's really vital to hear. Like, that's a very vital perspective to hear, because I think a lot of people outside that are in that position, whether it's like a boyfriend, a girlfriend, family situation, or just a friend, need to understand that it has to be that person's decision, is basically what you're saying, and it can get really messy and it can get really hurtful on both sides. And someone that's deep in active addiction is highly manipulative and highly, just a tornado. It can be
sick.
Right. They're sick. Exactly. And it's like, I've talked to a lot of people, family members and stuff like that, and friends, and it's like, I have no idea what to do. And if there's like a love component, like a son or a daughter or a father or whatever it is, that gets it even crazier, because then it's like, well, I love them, I'm going to help them. And in a lot of those situations, there's a lot of enabling going on towards the addict, without even really fully understanding that like what you were saying, what you like, it comes to a point where you have to separate yourself from that individual. And that, I've only been on the other side, but my parents, or my mom, grandma, and all them did that whole intervention thing where they're like, if you don't do this, we're going to separate ourselves from you. And
Mhm.
I have no idea. I have no idea what that feeling feels like, and like what it takes to say that to someone. So thank you for sharing that perspective.
Yeah. I wish I had the answer. Like, how do you
Yeah.
like to grab someone and get them to change their mind? I
Right.
mean,
Well, there is no answer, right?
yeah.
That's why this disease is so deadly. Is we don't we continue to, science has come a long way, but it hasn't come up with a cure for, alcoholism or addiction, because there really is. We can arrest it day to day, like we talk about in AA, but especially the active addict and alcoholic, like we do things to friends and family that are irrational and insane, like, and to the people on the outside it looks like we're trying to hurt them and everything else. In a lot of cases we do hurt them, but on the flip side, when people are trying to help us, like, we do the irrational thing, which is we push them away, we hurt them even more, we try to alienate ourselves. That's for me, that's how the disease worked. And that's why I think it's important, you said, like, protecting yourself. Like, you, at the end of the day, like, being a martyr doesn't work. Like, giving of yourself until you have nothing left to give. Like, a lot of the times for me, like, I kept using and drinking and everything else when people did that, and several individuals in my life gave me everything that they had and more. Um, get help, give me resources, everything. And I pretty much spat in their face and ignored them and burned the bridge on purpose, because it was it was a direct danger to my addiction. And I think it's important you say, like, you can't let yourself be hurt, because it hurts. It hurts when we're trying to help someone who won't accept the help. Like, it feels like we failed. But we haven't. Like, that individual is sick. Like, simply put, is it's a sick person, and we can't heal them.
I think like that's what's so great about this podcast is like just naming. I mean, I know it's really painful for you guys to kind of relive some of these things, or maybe it sounds really enticing. I know you guys have said that before too. But kind of like naming those stories, naming what happened before. Like, I know, Andrew, you've talked about even going to the center, like way before you started your recovery journey, or people reaching out, hearing those kinds of stories, which is why I think this podcast is really great, is so important to normalize in some ways that experience. Not that it's a normal thing, but to say, like, here are two guys who did school, graduated, sports, like all the things, and had this journey. Like, that could be me. That's not the homeless person on the street, if that's your idea, like bringing it down to earth. I think that's why what you guys are doing is so important. So I appreciate your work. I want to send it to people who I feel like, could use that perspective.
Thank you for saying that.
Zoe.
Yeah. I think that's like that's the whole thing. The whole spiel is trying to share it, and shared experience is the best way to connect with someone, is the best way to pique someone's antennas. And if we can do that for one or two people, you know what I mean? That would be dope. I think that's a good point. I never thought about it like that, but that's pretty much what it is. And yeah, I know. And we're blessed to be here. And the only reason we are is because you put us in contact. So
That's right.
Never forget it.
yeah. Well,
Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you guys.
Thank you so much for coming on. That was pretty sick. I'm glad we got to we could figure it out. And for those that don't know, I failed my time zone classes in middle school, and so I almost fudged the whole thing, but we worked it out. We shot from the hip, and it ended up being a beautiful episode. So thank you so much, Zoe, for coming on. Really appreciate it. It was awesome to sit and talk with you, and thank you, Andrew, as well. And we will keep coming back.
Appreciate you guys.